essential description of what chess is. Chess in general, by the way, most people generally agree that it started somewhere in the Middle East, and then over time became a favorite pastime of kings and queens in Western countries, and then came to reflect what is basically a medieval outlook, where you have pawns, which are like serfs with weapons, and the knights in shining armor, and the rooks, which is basically like a castle or a tower, and the king and queen, and they do battle, and that's the basics of chess. So we just purchased a chess and backgammon set, and I figured we'd at least describe what chess is and the pieces, and at least initially how they move. They came in these plastic containers, so the first thing we're going to do is set the board. When you set a chessboard, there's only one thing you need to remember, and that's the white square always goes on the right. It's just by long tradition. It shouldn't really matter too much, but it does to people who play chess. You don't have the dark piece on the right. You have the white piece on the right, and that's where you start setting the pieces. The first piece that you have is the pawn, and they occupy the whole second row, so let's start taking those off. So you have 8 pawns. This is the lowest ranking piece in chess. And the next ranking piece that you have are the knights. And let's go here. And then the bishops. And then the rooks. They're basically like towers, the rook. The queen, which is always placed in her color. This is the white queen, so it goes in the white space. And the king. In general, a pawn can move 1 space forward. There's one exception to this. There's a couple. The first is if it's the very first move in the game, you have the choice of moving any pawn forward two spaces, not just 1. And in general, if you're facing your opponents, a pawn that faces another pawn that's stuck, it can't move any further. But let's say if that's over there, a pawn can eat diagonally, can consume a piece diagonally, and that's how you defeat that piece. And the general movement for the knight is kind of complicated. It's probably the most complicated chess move. That moves either forward 1 and then 2 more spaces, or forward 2 and then 1 space. It always in the shape of an L. So this knight from that position, for example, could go here. It can go here. It can go here. It can go here. These are all L's, that either have 1 and then 2 or 2 and then 1. And they also have the ability, unlike any other chess piece, to jump over a piece. So if this knight's here, this can be its first move. It can jump over a piece. No other piece can jump over a piece, not even the queen. The next piece is the bishop. You have 2, 1 on each color, and the bishop's moving diagonal, either 1 piece or any number of pieces as long as they're not blocked. And so this piece from right here can go anywhere along that white line, backwards or forward. Same here, as long as it's not obstructed. If it happened to have, if there's an opponent piece over here, for example, then I could be able to take that piece entirely that way. And then next to the bishops, then you have the rooks, which are like the towers. And they can move any number of spaces straight or on the horizontal like that. They can't go on the diagonal like the bishops can. These go only straight, any number of spaces. And the queen can go either 1 space or any number of spaces in every single direction. It can't jump over pieces, but it is the most powerful piece so the king is similar to the queen in the sense that it can move any number of in any direction, but only 1 space. Whereas a queen can move any number of spaces in any of the directions. The object of the game of chess is to capture the king, to give it a direct threat of attack where it can't escape and where it can't interpose or put anything in between to protect it. The king also has a weird move that can happen during a game, and I'll give you an example of what that is. So let's say these 2 pieces have already moved ahead, and the king is not currently a threat at any moment, but you see that the other side is developing a strategy to try to capture your king. You can mess that strategy up a little bit by doing the following move. you can do that move as long as that rook hasn't been moved and as long as the king hasn't been moved. And it could also happen in the other direction as well. As long as this hasn't been moved and this hasn't been moved and the king is not currently under threat, this is an option. You bring the rook over to the king and the king over a spot. And a lot of times that really messes a strategy that someone has. Another tricky move that might happen at the end is this lowly pawn, and almost in a biblical sense of the first shall be last and last shall be first. If it proceeds all the way to the end of the board and doesn't get challenged by the other side and gets all the way to the end, it is now promoted to be any piece you want. Most people choose the queen because the queen is the most powerful piece and can go any number of directions. And you can have technically 2 queens on the board at that time. But it's not always the queen. Sometimes people choose a knight because there might be any number of pieces that are in the way, and by putting the knight there, that might automatically lead to a checkmate. A checkmate is when you threaten the king with a piece and the king can't escape and you can't put anything in between to stop that. And the king itself can't eat what's threatening. So they're the basics of chess.